International Master Danny Wrench here, attempting to provide some instruction on the game between Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura from the World Blitz Championship. Here we have a Scotch. Hikaru played the bishop to c5. Classical variation. Magnus thought about it for a second, decided to go for his line with knight to b3. And after the main line moves are played, here Magnus pauses, as his last main game in this line with queen to e2 was a win over Hikaru from the Nanjing Masters in 2012. That game went like this, and it's important for this game because you'll see a common idea for black, which is to put this knight on d4 because, one, the bishop on this diagonal will help with defense and create counterplay. White doesn't like that, so Magnus played queen d3 in that game, but eventually achieved an edge and went on to win. This move, queen e2, has been played by most of the strong players that play this line since then, which is guys like Caruana, Volakitin, among others. But here Magnus plays this move, bishop to g5. Now, bishop to g5 creates an immediate pin and possible threats at times with knight d5, though not right away. Hikaru played castles, which isn't the most common move in the database, but makes sense. Queen of 3 is a new idea played by both David Navarra and Ho Yafan recently. White has a very simple intention, wants to take here and double the pawns. You'll see that Hikaru just paused there and looked up at the sky, trying to remember his lines, just like Hikaru does so well, and guess what he did? He remembered his line with knight to d4, exclamaviach. This similar idea that we saw in the Hikaru game comes into play. The bishop comes to d4, where it defends both f6 and creates tactics on c3. Magnus has a good think and then decides he has nothing better but to castle long, allow black to take on c3. By the way, queen takes c3 would lose to knight takes e4, winning a pawn. So b takes c3 is forced. You'd think that white should still have a little bit of an edge with the bishop pair here, as well as the potential to attack on the king side. Now we're seeing Magnus actually play these moves here, and we'll slow down for a second to say that on rook e8, the move that was played in the game, we start to see a forcing line that maybe means that we won't see Magnus Carlsen play this line again, as white doesn't really achieve much heading from the middle game transition into the endgame. Hikaru is thinking right now about what he wants to do, so he takes on c3 and then plays this line rook e8 as we just talked about. One thing I want to get to before they're there is you're going to see in a couple moments here, after rook e8, bishop c4, d6, white has a critical decision to make. Go to the endgame with bishop takes f6, or to play for h3, or moves like rook to e1 to guard the e-pawn. Any idea that keeps the pieces on the board in the middle game might give white a little bit better chances if he's intending on creating an attack against the black king, leaving the pin here. But Magnus ends up thinking about the position and decides there really is nothing better here than to take on f6. I've analyzed this h3 line a little bit, and what I can say is that it's probably just about equal, neither side really achieving too much. I think that black can still play moves like bishop e6 and try to simplify the position, and white's king may end up being just as weak as black's. So, back to the game. What we're seeing now is that bishop takes f6 was played, moves that are all forced come into play, and in watching this video live, actually, without knowing the result of the game, my first thought is white must have a little bit of an edge here, but Hikaru quickly plays f5, the move you just saw, which the whole point is to undouble these f-pawns, and leaving black with no positional weakness will point out the fact that really black is probably the only one who can win this game. Taking advantage of white's weaknesses on the queen side long term is not going to be an easy task, but f5 is a really strong move by Hikaru, and you'll see that Magnus goes into his longest think of the game. Hikaru looks around, that confident head look to the side. Magnus decides the best thing he can do is bishop d5, a good move that not only defends the e4 pawn, but also puts pressure on b7, making it a little bit tricky to develop. The only issue is that Hikaru is going to be able to simplify, getting rid of his weaknesses by taking here, play c6 to remove the bishop from b7, and if black can coordinate the pieces, meaning complete his development, he'll have eliminated white's only remaining advantage, which is these two rooks. And one of the things to realize is that if you eliminate this temporary advantage of a development lead, white is actually the one with the long-term issues. Again, we see Hikaru play rook e5 very confidently, and more it seems that the position is headed toward a game where white really doesn't have very good winning chances with the weaknesses on the king side here. Some very good moves are played here. Bishop to d5 offers the trade of rooks, which, even though it seems that trading wouldn't be a good idea, it's Magnus's last chance to try to take advantage of the lack of development, and that is you remove black's only developed piece with hopes of infiltrating, though once Hikaru plays king f8, Magnus really has nothing. Rook e4 is a sort of phantom threat. Bishop f5 is coming to relocate over to the king side, and once Hikaru achieves this bishop, on g6, as we'll see in just a moment, there really is nothing much here for white to show. It's all black from here on out. h4 is played, not a bad move. I guess if white gets the majority with g4 and h5, we'll still see f7 be a weakness, though it's hardly a threat after h5 by Hikaru. What we're going to see black try to do is activate the rook, put this pawn on d5 at some point to block the bishop on b3. And if that occurs, then this bishop will be out of play, which is why after rook d8, what you just saw, after rook to d8, Magnus played bishop c4 to d3. Much rather have this bishop traded than have it stuck over on b3, where black might essentially be up a piece. After king g7, though, we see that white really doesn't have a lot of good options. Trading into the rook ending is still going to leave him with the positional weaknesses to go with. So Magnus tries to create some threats. If establishing the pawn on a5 happens, the rook to b4 might come, so Hikaru stops that with b6. And after g3, we're seeing Hikaru play c5, which immediately threatens counterplay. Magnus is a little worried about it, plays bishop to e2. Really, he just doesn't want the bishop in a place where it can be attacked with tempo, and maybe has this idea of targeting the h5 pawn. Though these moves here are sort of natural for white to try to create counterplay. What we're going to see is that they headed to a position where Magnus had a critical decision to make. In this position with the pawn on a5, he's still thinking about it after rook f6. But the critical decision to make has to do with, do I allow Hikaru the chance to take on f4 or not? I'm going to give you a clue that the wrong decision was made by Magnus, unfortunately followed by a wrong decision if you're Hikaru Nakamura. Here Magnus doesn't see a right way to guard the f2 pawn, so he sort of has to play this move bishop f3 instead of moving the rook. The only problem is that accurate calculation here by Hikaru might have led him to a line that goes like rook takes f4, pawn takes f4, and king f6 exclam, giving up the d5 pawn. After bishop takes d5, king f5, not only is this pawn threatened, but the most important threat is the infiltration of the king to the king side. A line like this might have occurred. White doesn't have to play f5, but this pawn's going to fall. Black will remove the king, and an outside pass pawn is a huge advantage. This is all my own analysis, but in the end I realized that black will be in an endgame up a pawn, and likely the only one who can win. What we'll find out is that probably that was Hikaru's only real chance to win after playing a great game with black, equalizing and eventually outplaying as they transitioned into the endgame. But Hikaru chose not to take on f4, instead played rook to d6, and we headed toward the line that you're seeing now. Both sides moving back and forth. Here we just saw this move rook a4 by Magnus, but neither side has anything. Sort of an attempted draw offer by Hikaru to repeat. Magnus says, okay, we'll see if you really want to draw. Hikaru's thinking, I'd really like to beat Magnus right now. I'm going to go for the win with b5. And after bishop f1, rook to b6, it seems that he may have made the right decision, though. Magnus plays a little tickle again and says, how are you going to guard this pawn? You still want to draw? Hikaru says, no, I'll play rook a6. If you play bishop takes d5, I have ideas like rook to a2. And bishop e4 is met by rook a4. A very interesting idea, I think. So here Magnus defends the c2 pawn. The bishops get traded on d3. I wasn't sure who I liked in the rook ending at first. I don't think either one of them were. At first I thought that Hikaru must have an edge still with the positional weaknesses, but we'll find that he's unable to deal with the h-pawn without just getting behind it. And that's what happens here. After g4 is played, they take, the check, the king activates itself. Both sides are getting under real-time pressure now. Under 30 seconds, I believe, although we can't exactly see the clock. Magnus is really living off the increment with a 3 minutes plus 2 second time control. This move rook g1 is really nice, because not only does it prevent the rook from coming behind, but it threatens to advance. This is the move that really secured drawing chances for white. Hikaru is frustrated, as you can see. He doesn't quite know what to do. Moves the rook, which threatens b4 and d4, but Magnus says no thank you. He says, alright, I'll play b4 anyway, threatening to bring my rook over behind the pawn, which of course is a great idea. But after rook to g3, he realizes I can't trade into the king and pawn ending because white will win with this outside pass pawn. I have to try to come behind, but Magnus says no thank you. Alright, well then I got to get my king behind the pawn. That's fine, but in the end, will I be able to pick up these pawns before you can get this? Turns out no. Hikaru ends up having just enough counterplay with the threat on the f2 pawn. Both sides lose these pawns, and in the end, Magnus decides there's no way to effectively remove the rook from being behind the pawn, which is why we end up in a drawn ending here. Probably I moved a little bit too fast there, but if you want to see it even faster, you can click here in case you're not interested in the commentary or the long version. Here the moves get repeated, a draw is agreed, neither side's happy about it, and unfortunately, one of the most anticipated